Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go! When my dad was still in the military, he was in charge of a group of soldiers. One of them was a female who he said probably had mental issues. He has no idea how she even got in, but she did. This female soldier befriended another soldier. Because of her issues, she trusted him without question very quickly. Eventually, she trusted him to drive her car and get some money out of the ATM for her. This little jerk took her car, completely emptied her account, and then went absent without official leave. Now, this girl was about to leave the army due to her issues, and that money was all she had to help her once she was out. So, she was devastated. They eventually found the guy, and he was brought before my dad since my dad was his superior officer. Now, I'm not entirely sure why, but they wouldn't just straight up arrest him and send him to fill sandbags in the Texas heat at the base's jail. My dad said something about the legal process takes a while for a Chapter 10 or something like that. In other words, the civilian police couldn't arrest him since he was under military jurisdiction, and the military couldn't do anything because it was being investigated or processed. So anyway, my dad couldn't find a way to send him to the jail. This guy is all cocky like, I don't regret it one bit, she's just stupid for letting me have access. Not my fault she's stupid, and so on. My dad was looking for any way to punish this guy until he found out the most borderline illegal thing he could do. He ended up going to the guy still sitting there with a smirk on his face, and my dad said, well, since you don't show any remorse and I can't send you to fill up sandbags, here is what you're gonna do. I got a job for you. Your job is to sit in this tiny room and make sure the paint doesn't peel. No one could talk to him. He would leave to eat. He ate in an isolated room facing the corner and to go to the bathroom. That was it. Also, my dad was only required to give him 4 hours of sleep, so he could leave the room at midnight, and at 4 in the morning he was woken up to make sure that paint didn't peel. My dad even decided to have some fun with him. One day he went in and said, I feel like being nice today. I'm gonna let you read today's paper. The guy was overjoyed at the prospect of getting to read the newspaper. All he had done was stare at a wall and didn't even know what was going on in the outside world. Right as he started to read, my dad took it away immediately and said, actually, never mind. You're stupid. Can't believe you trusted me. Then he left again. After a few days, the guy couldn't take it. He called his attorney and begged for him to find a way to send him to the base's jail so he could fill sandbags instead of staring at a wall making sure the paint doesn't peel. But the attorney couldn't find a way to make it happen. Eventually, they were able to discharge him from the army. My dad's second-in-command had to escort him to the front gate to officially release him. What the jerk didn't know was the civilian police were finally able to get a warrant for his arrest for stealing that poor girl's money. So the whole drive, this cocky guy is like, yep, soon I'll be out and I can tell you how I feel about yada yada yada. And the second-in-command is like, yep, you can say whatever you want. When they got to the gate, they released him and the second-in-command was like, well, you're out of the army now. You can say whatever you want. The jerk opens his mouth to speak, but the second-in-command goes, wait, just one more thing. Gentlemen, this is a man. And the 2 civilian cops who had been waiting out front immediately put him in cuffs. My dad's second-in-command leaned into the guy's face and said, have a nice freaking day. Then laughed hard. This just happened the other day at the store I hate more than anything. To understand this story, 2 things you have to know first. About 6 months ago, I lost my legs from the knees down due to diabetes. Second is the kicker of the story. I have always carried a firearm for many years. I know many officers because I go to the range. This is important. I was at Wally World with my son. He went off with a cart to get some things. All of a sudden, this large woman came up to me and very rudely said, I need your wheelchair. I looked at her and said no. She then said, I need it more than you. I looked at her and said, lady, I don't care what you want. I have no legs. And I wheeled off. No more than 5 minutes later, she's screaming at me saying that I stole her chair, which makes no sense because on the back of my seat is a painting of my childhood idol, Ace Frehley. I looked at her and said, "Leave me alone. This is not your chair." As I started to wheel off, she actually came up behind me and pushed me off my wheelchair, got into it, and she took off. Management came running, my son came flying through the store, he's very protective of me, and everyone was trying to help me. The cops were called, the officers we will call Jack and Maria, who I know very well from the range, saw me on the floor and honestly were shocked seeing me lying there on the floor. I told them everything that happened. When they caught up to the woman, she claimed I stole her wheelchair. As I said earlier, I have always carried a firearm. A friend of mine made me a holster that looks like it carries a cell phone and a small iPad which is attached to the side of my chair. When she was brought to me, she was screaming at me saying that I should be arrested for stealing her chair. Jack and Maria held back laughter because they knew she was full of it. Maria, who is the sweetest and kindest person, saw the holster, looked at the woman, and Jack knew what was about to happen. Maria said, "Ma'am, what is on the side of the chair?" She told him it was her phone and coupons. Maria said, "Can you show me?" And she refused. Maria said to her, "If this wheelchair belongs to you, then show me the contents." She said fine. When she opened the holster, her eyes got larger beyond belief. Jack looked at her and said, "You're arrested for assault and a felony of stealing a firearm." When she was being put in cuffs, she was kicking and screaming like a 2-year-old. Being in a wheelchair is an adjustment and not an easy one. People look at you, and some even make comments. It's not easy. It was a crisp, sunny morning just like any other. Sam, my golden retriever, and I set out for our daily walk around the block. Sam was his usual cheerful self, tail wagging and a bounce in his step that showed his excitement. I'd often joked that he looked forward to these walks more than I did. As we approached Mr. X's house, my neighbor, I noticed he was outside, which was unusual. Mr. X was a recluse, rarely seen outside, that when he was, he usually kept to himself. I'd exchanged pleasantries with him once or twice in all the years I'd lived in this neighborhood, but our interactions had never been specifically friendly. Sam, being the outgoing dog he was, trotted slightly toward Mr. X. Still, a blur of happiness, I'd seen Sam greet so many neighbors like this, and they usually welcomed his friendly demeanor. But not Mr. X. Out of nowhere, Mr. X raised his leg and kicked Sam with such force that my poor dog cried out in pain. I couldn't believe my eyes. I'd never seen such cruelty directed towards any living being, let alone my beloved Sam. "Hey, what the hell are you doing?" I shouted at him. Mr. X didn't respond to my question. Instead, he started ranting about filthy animals and how they were a nuisance to the neighborhood. I was appalled by his words, but I had no idea just how far he'd take his hostility. In an instant, Mr. X pulled a handgun from his pocket and pointed it directly at Sam, who had cowered in fear after the attack. Panic surged through my veins. I knew I had to do something to protect my dog, my loyal companion for years. "Put that gun down! Are you crazy?" I shouted, my heart pounding in my chest. I couldn't let Sam come to harm. And without thinking, I positioned myself between Mr. X and Sam, shielding my dog from the deadly threat. I knew it was a dangerous move, but I couldn't stand by and watch my dog get hurt. My actions seemed to have an effect. The commotion had attracted the attention of other neighbors, and they quickly gathered around, gasping at the terrifying scene unfolding before them. "Someone call 911. He's got a gun!" a woman screamed. Within minutes, the wailing sirens of police cars filled the air. The officers arrived swiftly, their trained instinct kicking in to defuse a dangerous situation. They approached Mr. X cautiously, giving clear commands to lower the weapon. "Drop the gun, sir. Put it down," one officer shouted. Mr. X hesitated for a moment, his eyes darting wildly between me and the officers, but he finally complied, dropping the handgun to the ground. The police moved in swiftly, restraining him and securing the weapon. I could hardly believe what had just happened. The officer ensured Mr. X was in custody, and they collected statements from me and the witnesses. I was shaken, but I knew I had to be strong for Sam. As the police wrapped up their investigation, I rushed Sam to the nearest vet. His cries of pain still echoed in my ears and I couldn't bear to see him suffering. The vet examined him thoroughly, assuring me that while he had been injured, it didn't appear to be anything life-threatening. Sam was given pain medication and some much-needed TLC. While Sam was getting the care he needed, I received updates from the police. Mr. X was facing charges of animal cruelty and assault with a deadly weapon. I couldn't believe that someone living just a few doors down had harbored such animosity toward innocent animals that was capable of such violence. When I finally brought Sam back home, he was visibly shaken but still wagging his tail. Dogs truly have an incredible resilience and capacity for forgiveness. I was overwhelmed with gratitude that he was going to be okay. I decided to share this story on Reddit not just to vent my anger and frustration but also to raise awareness about the importance of standing up for our beloved pets and holding those who harm them accountable. Sam's unwavering loyalty and love had saved his life today, and I couldn't be more thankful for my furry friend. I, 27, recently got married to my wonderful husband. It was a small wedding with just our family and closest friends. My husband and I both love space, so we decided to have a space-themed wedding. We had star decorations, a galaxy marble cake, and fairy lights. My sister, 32 female, was invited to be the ring bearer, as she and I are very close. However, when she showed up at the wedding, she was wearing a Halloween costume of Saturn. She was literally dressed up like the planets. We made it very clear in our invitations that this wedding was strictly formal. My sister and I joke around a lot, so I laughed about it and asked her to get ready as the wedding was starting soon. But she fully planned to bring us the rings in her Halloween costume. She refused to change into a serious outfit, saying that our family would find it funny because Saturn has rings and she's a ring bearer. This was the most important day in my life, and I expected her to take it seriously, even though we often joke around. So I told her she could change or she could leave. She called me overdramatic and left. Am I the jerk here? And now some comments on the post. Someone saying, her idea sounds hilarious, but yeah, I agree, you're not the jerk. There are many days for her to be punny. This will not be one of them. Another commenter adds, not the jerk. She called you overdramatic rather than get dressed? Nah, you're not the jerk. She is. I've got a story that's been brewing in my head for quite some time, and I need to get it off my chest. You see, it all started when my partner and I moved into our dream house a little over 2 years ago. We were excited about starting this new chapter in our lives, but little did we know what kind of neighbors we were about to encounter. Our attached neighbors were an elderly woman in her 60s and her grandson, a young man in his late teens. We decided to be neighborly and introduce ourselves, hoping to establish a friendly rapport. Little did we know that their expectations would soon prove to be entirely unreasonable. The elderly woman dropped hints about how the previous owners used to bake her goodies all the time, insinuating that we should follow suit. It was as if she believed she deserved to be treated like a princess. The grandson, on the other hand, introduced himself as the worst person in town. What an introduction, right? After that encounter, we decided to maintain a friendly distance and keep out of their way. But things quickly took a turn for the worse. Within a week of our arrival, they began to engage in late-night screaming matches, blasting music, and even banging on the walls. It got so bad that the police were frequent visitors to their house due to the woman's incessant calls about disputes with her grandson. Despite all this, my partner and I were determined to make the best out of our new home. We invested time and effort into fixing up the house, making it beautiful and adding value to it. At that point, it was just the two of us in our mid-20s, so we figured we could handle the neighborly drama. Fast forward to last month and things took a terrifying turn. One evening, as darkness settled in, we heard what we believed to be gunshots coming from our backyard. Living in a downtown suburb, this was not something we expected. We had installed security cameras for peace of mind, so we decided to check the footage. What we saw and heard shook us to the core. The grandson and his friends were sitting in their yard, discussing shooting another round and laughing about how they would pass it off as fireworks. They even mentioned the caliber of the rounds they were firing. It was dark, so we couldn't see them actually shooting, but our cameras picked up the sound of 9 gunshots. Naturally, we called the cops, concerned for our safety. By the time the police arrived, the kids had left, and there was no conclusive evidence of anyone with a firearm on a premises. It was frustrating to say the least, but we had no choice but to let it go, hoping it wouldn't happen again. But our neighborly nightmare was far from over. In the beginning of August, the elderly woman decided to let her daughter, son-in-law, and their children move in with them. This decision led to an escalation of the chaos. The screaming and yelling intensified. Now, with crying kids added to the mix, as much as I wanted to intervene, I hesitated to call Child Protective Services, fearing the repercussions for the innocent children. My partner and I decided to take a road trip to visit family and explore some cool places at the end of August. It was our chance to escape the mounting stress caused by our neighbors. We kept an eye on our property through our cameras whenever we had a bit of cell service. That's when we received a call from our unattached neighbor, who informed us that our attached neighbors were building a hideous shed using spare planks of wood. At first, we tried not to worry too much, as their tacky shed wasn't directly impacting us, apart from being an eyesore in our otherwise pleasant neighborhood. We continued our road trip, occasionally checking our cameras to ensure they weren't trespassing or causing any damage to our property. We returned home just a few hours ago, still relishing the memories of our trip, but as soon as we arrived, our heart sank. Our attached neighbors had gone beyond all limits of decency. They had dug out and stolen a part of our fence, a metal post and chain link to create a back fence and gate for their own yard. This left enormous holes in our back parking area, posing a serious hazard. As my partner stepped out of the car, he nearly tripped and fell into one of those holes. They had also improperly tied into our fence, pulling it lopsided and causing significant damage. Unfortunately, our cameras did not capture them in the act of stealing our fence, and they were in our yard in one frame and in theirs the next. My partner and I were left stunned and infuriated. We knew we had to take action, but we were also acutely aware of the dangerous and violent nature of our neighbors. We didn't want to provoke them, given that we shared a wall with them and had no firewall to separate our properties. So we began to strategize the safest way to report their actions. The next day, we decided to contact the borough authorities to report the theft and damage to our property. We are planning to press charges, however, we were cautious in our approach, making sure to emphasize our desire for anonymity and to ensure our safety. We were dealing with unpredictable neighbors and we couldn't afford to take any unnecessary risks. So after all the trouble we've been through with our entitled neighbors, things finally took a turn. We decided to report him to the local authorities for stealing our fence and causing damage to our property. We also had evidence of all the bad things he had done, like the loud fights, the gunshots, and the confrontations. We showed all this proof to the police and they promised to look into it. One night, the police got called to our neighbor's place because of another noise complaint. This time, it was a different neighbor who had had enough of their entitled behavior. Our neighbors lost control and started yelling and fighting with the police officers. It got really messy and the officers had to arrest them. The elderly lady, her grandson, and some others were taken into custody. They were charged with things like attacking the police and resisting arrest. We watched all of this from our home and it felt like a weight had been lifted off our shoulders. It was like a dark cloud that had been hanging over us was finally gone. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching and see you next time.